On today's show, plenty to get to, including a blowout loss for the Hawks in Cleveland, plus an all-star stub for Trae Young, trade buzz, and much more, and all that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1899 of Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday evening into Friday, and today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. The Super Bowl, the Super 59, is actually here right now, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. If you're a new customer, bet $5, and if you win, you get $200 in bonus bets. Download the app right now or head to FanDuel.com to get started. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, make it your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcast. We are always here, 365, always busy on the podcast. We appreciate you listening to the show. Please like the video on YouTube as you're watching it. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, etc. And we'll dive in right now. Normally, I would talk about almost exclusively a game that transpired. And the Hawks did play tonight. I will have full coverage, as I always do, about the game later on. It's their seventh straight loss for the Hawks. Obviously a tough spot in a lot of ways. They were actually 11.5-point underdogs in this game. So it's not exactly shocking that they would have had a tough time on the road in Cleveland against a team, by the way, that has the best record in the NBA now in the Cavs. But that'll be later on in the podcast. Normally, again, I'd leave with the game. But because of the result in part, and also because there's a couple of bigger stories, I want to begin elsewhere and come back to the game later on. The first thing I'll say on the show is that Trey Young did not make the All-Star team, at least as of now. Yes, he could make it as an injury replacement, but as of Thursday evening, when the NBA, via the guys on TNT, announced the All-Star reserves, Trae was not on it. And I think it's a pretty egregious snub for Trae. I don't get worked up very often. If you listen to the show regularly, you will know that. This one actually legitimately bothered me. I think it was that bad of a miss by the coaches who vote on this particular thing. I was not as shocked as I could have been, for instance. I think it's more of me thinking it's wrong than being shocked by it, because this has happened before for Trae Young. No need to relitigate all of that stuff right now, but I've done the work now for years and years and years about this, and covering the team and covering his entire career with the Hawks so far. And I think, to me, he should pretty clearly be a 6-time All-Star, at least 5, if not 6. And currently, because he was snubbed today, he's still a 3-time All-Star. So 7 seasons, only 3 All-Star appearances, and this is a player who for his career is averaging 25 points plus and 9 assists plus per game. And he's made the All-Star team less than half of the seasons in his career. To be clear, his rookie year, he shouldn't have made it. But every year since then, he's probably should have made the All-Star team, only made it half the time over that sample size. For example, people have kind of forgotten this. Trae did not even make the All-Star team the season that the Hawks made the conference finals. And he had huge numbers and good efficiency that year, and it just didn't matter. That's one example. And look, I won't do the 30-minute deep dive on this and talk about every competition that he had, Tyler Hero, Darius Garland, Dame Lillard, all that stuff. But putting Tyler Hero over Trae Young, to me, is particularly hard to swallow. Hero, by the way, is having a very good season. He's become a very good player. I don't want to say otherwise. But look, it's not his fault he was selected here, but we can probably just be adults together and acknowledge that he's not as good as Trae Young at basketball, nor has he been as good as Trae Young this season at basketball. He isn't the only one. Again, there's other guys that you could certainly argue Trae over, but I think it was pretty clearly directly the last spot between Hero and Young, if you go by the voting and the way that it was announced, all that stuff, and that happened. So as far as the case is concerned, and my period of outrage, I would say, comes with number 1 on the list is that Trae is the best playmaker in the NBA, or at least number 2 behind Jokic, perhaps, right now. He leads the NBA in assists this year comfortably. He leads the East in assists by more than 2 per game, which is actually crazy. He has 20% more assists than anybody else in the Eastern Conference this season. And it's not fluky or fueled by shooting luck. In fact, he's actually been unlucky on assists this year. If you look at the advanced numbers, he has an even bigger lead in potential assists. And if anything, the Hawks have been pretty bad as a shooting team, which makes assists even harder to get and also gives you less space on the court to operate in. And yeah, his individual efficiency as a shooter this year is down. And that is part of why I was not arguing for him to start the All-Star game, for example. He's not on that level this year because of the shooting dip. I think he's played well, but that is worth pointing out, to be sure. I think that also he's had a pretty brutal situation to play in offensively, not only now without Jalen Johnson for quarter of the season so far, but Bogey's been terrible. The Hawks have had one of the worst spacing situations, I would say, as a floor spacing shooting team of any team that's actually trying to win this season. Even the guys who are playing well, like Dyson Daniels, not a good shooter, obviously, at this stage. So, in fact, this is the least spacing the Hawks have had since Trae was a rookie, probably, and regularly playing with lineups that have like no shooting on them is very hard. And he's done a good job kind of carrying those groups in a lot of ways. Number two here that I want to point out is that, yeah, he's a bad defender. That's not changed, but it has improved. Like, he's still not a good defender, but he's not a bad one compared to some other guys. Like, for instance, Darius Garland and Tyler Hero are not like meaningfully better than Trae Young defensively, especially Hero, I would say. And I think Trae has improved in a way people have not always talked about beyond Atlanta. Plus, the Hawks have a 112.5 defensive rating this season with Trae Young on the court, not off, on the court. They've been better with him off the court, which is natural because they're playing defense first lineups. But if you just took the defensive rating with Trae on the court this year, the Hawks would be 13th in the NBA in defense. 13th with Trae on the court. They have built a solid defense with Trae on the court this year. So he's not some guy that you can't build around defensively. That has now been put to pasture. Obviously, there's a ceiling on your defense with Trae. Not going to litigate that again right now, but he's been a part of a solid defense this year, for instance. And the last thing is, you can't even really ding Trae for lack of team success. Like, obviously, there's a history of team success being a huge indicator of all-star selections. And that makes sense to some degree. Like, you don't want to have a bunch of guys who are on terrible teams. I get that. But the Hawks, even with this loss today and with the losses recently, are in the play-in as of right now, with Jalen missing 12 games, Hunter missing 14 games, Bogey missing half the season, being hurt right now, as we'll talk about later on, maybe being traded in the near future. Those were their next three best offensive players coming into the year. Jalen, Hunter, and Bogey. They've all missed a bunch of time, and one of them, Bogey, has underperformed as well. And by the way, the voting didn't happen today. The voting happened several days ago. So yeah, people were like, well, the Hawks are losing okay, they've been on a losing streak right now. But the voting didn't actually happen, what I heard, over the weekend. So at least two of the losses did not count in the voting. So the Hawks were basically like a 500 team when the voting was done, and basically the exact same team overall as the Miami Heat. And you're picking Tyler Hero over Trae Young? I don't think so. I don't think you can give Trae a positive bump for the team record stuff. That's not how this works, but it shouldn't be a knock on him as well at this point. Like, even right now, when the announcement was made, the Heat were a game and a half ahead of the Hawks, even with a losing streak. It's kind of silly. And by the way, the losing streak is because the team's roster fell apart much more than anything else. And one more thing here, the Hawks are 11 points per 100 possessions better on offense when Trae plays than when he's off the floor. So he also drives team success. It's not just about individual numbers. He is the offensive centerpiece for the team. And when he plays, the offense is actually pretty good. When he's not there, the offense is terrible. There it is. There's a longer discussion as well that could be had. Actually, Stan Van Gundy on TNT mentioned this on the broadcast tonight about, the roles of these guys, how they're defended also. Like, Trae gets defended in a way that is a A1 player defensive, like the way the team's game plan for him. They throw the kitchen sink at Trae. Double teams, face guarding all around the floor, game planning, scheming for him and him alone. While Jalen's had a breakout season this year, Trae's still number one on the call sheet by a wide margin offensively in a way that other guys in this same realm are not. Even Dame Lillard plays with Giannis. Dame's had a great career, Hall of Famer, all that stuff, but easier role than Trae offensively. Darius Garland is one of a four-man lead unit in Cleveland. He's been great this year, same thing. Smaller role, smaller workload. Tyler Hero has had a bigger role than usual in Miami. You're still playing with Eric Spoelstra, the best coach in the league probably, and Bam Adebayo, and Jimmy Butler's been playing some. Obviously, he's been out a lot recently. But all that said, like, that's kind of a relevant data point, especially when you're talking when the lead point is like, oh, it's efficiency. Like, well, team context matters in efficiency, we'll say. And the last point that I'll make on Trae, and I promise I'll stop, is if you combine the points that Trae Young scores and the points that he creates with his assists, exactly one player in the NBA this year is responsible for more points than Trae Young. One player. And his name is Nikola Jokic, who's the best player in the world and in the Western Conference. So Trae Young leads the Eastern Conference pretty comfortably, actually, in points created per game. Number one. And look, I'm not saying Trae is the second best offensive player in the league. He's not. I don't believe that. He's not Jokic. He's not Shea. I'm not saying that. In fact, I don't think Trae's a top 10 player in the league. But he should be an all-star. It was pretty clear to me. I could do a full show on this. I won't. It's just one segment at the moment, but I think he's very good. He should be an all-star. And by the way, he still could make it. I mentioned that before, but there could be injury replacements or whatever. But he shouldn't have to worry about that. He should just be on the team. And it's not something that, I would normally leave the podcast with, but given the result and all that stuff, I thought it was pretty egregious. And when that happens, I will say so. So there you go. And I will come back to the game later on. Plus, in a second, I will talk about the trade buzz because that's also been percolated. It's a very busy show. More to come in just one moment. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can actually focus on your day. An expert who will find you the best deduction possible, every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can actually get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. That is TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only on iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. I promise the game is coming, but first, some trade buzz, because there is plenty of that going around. If I had actually time today before an early tip-off, I would have probably done a separate episode on this, honestly, but we weren't able to do that before the game started because logistics and day jobs exist. But anyway, mostly it's Bogdanovic-centric trade talk. If you missed it over the weekend and early this week, Bogey was out inexplicably with no announcement in one game, and then he was listed as being out with personal reasons on Tuesday. And then for tonight's game, he was listed as not with team. And I was told, I can report he's not on the road trip with the Hawks. Neither Capela, by the way, which is relevant. But on Bogey, there was a report today from the Arizona Republic that got some attention involving report talks between the Hawks and the Suns about Bogey and Jusuf Nurkic. I am pretty confident the Hawks will not do that without some real sweeteners coming back because Nurkic has money for next year that's really bad money, negative value contract. Also, there's been reporting from multiple sources now that Nurkic is not currently part of the discussions for the Hawks, but that's the one that kind of made the rounds on social media today. I think that it would not be insane to trade Bogey for Nurkic if you got a real pick back, for instance, because Bogey is still better than Nurkic, better money, all that stuff. But if you wanted to kind of pair a 7-foot backup center with Okongwu for next year and get a pick to do it, that's not a crazy thought. I don't love the deal. You want to get a lot of value in return for doing that. But anyway, at the moment, it seems like that's not going to be active at this moment in time. Also, so Phoenix has interest, it seems like. I've heard that. It's been reported now in Bogey. Mike Scott reported Miami as a team with interest in Bogey. No details beyond that, but those are the two teams now that we've actually heard have interest in Bogey that I can report publicly. And look, before I get going on this is a question I get today even, and probably all the time right now, is that how Bogey would even have trade value because he's been so bad this year. Number one, I agree with you. He's not been good this year. That's not up for debate. He's having a bad season, both health-wise and also performance-wise. But teams also saw him be awesome last year, awesome. Very good this summer in international play. And he's a veteran guy that teams are going to have some stock in, considering his shooting. He's always been kind of a gamer, big game kind of player, shot maker, etc. He's obviously a bench guy at this point. He's not going to be a game changer for you, but he's someone that teams I think generally think is going to improve if he is healthy. Plus, the contract is seen by some people at least as potentially pretty decent because it's declining year over year, and there's a team option on the end, not a player option, a team option on the end that could be pretty enticing. But anyway, it's Phoenix and Miami right now that have been reported to be interested in Bogey. I have heard there's 4 or 5 teams that are in the mix on Bogey. And that number could even grow in the next week plus, because, by the way, we are less than a week away from the deadline at this stage. Mark Stein reported today, on Thursday, that the Hawks are, quote, actively exploring the trade market, end quote, for Bogdanovic. And then Jake Fisher, who works with Mark Stein, has also been on this podcast before, a friend of mine. Jake said on Thursday afternoon that, quote, momentum is building on a Bogdanovic trade, end quote, and that the Hawks could, quote, have multiple options when it comes to moving him, end quote. So obviously, overall, as of right now on Bogey, based on what I'm hearing behind the scenes, making calls, making texts, all that fun stuff this time of year, and what's been reported as well, I certainly think and lean towards Bogey being traded as the most likely outcome between now and Thursday. They still got 6.5 days, basically, as we're recording this podcast to do that. I won't do a percentage right now, but it's over 50%. Like, I think it's more likely than not he gets traded at this point. I won't go further than that. It's like as to why, but like him being away from the team is obviously a notable thing. He's not playing and probably until the deadline at this point. Seems pretty safe to project that. And, I've just heard that it's probably getting there. Now, what I will also say, and if you listen to the show regularly, you won't be surprised by this. After 15 years or so covering the league and the Hawks, all that stuff, that I tend to be cautious and I don't assume trades are done until they're actually done. That's a good policy to have, generally speaking, if you're in my position. But there's a ton of smoke, even more that's been reported. Like there's a lot there on Bogey, and I think I am leaning towards him being traded, but not in a 100% capacity right now. On Capela, it's not quite as busy or fireworks filled at this stage. They're listing Clint with back spasms right now. As I said a minute ago, he's not on the road trip either, but he does have an actual injury listing in the way that Bogey does not. Bogey is just listed as not with team, whereas Clint actually, look, my best guess on Clint is that he probably has a small injury. He probably could play if it was like a playoff game right now. But same principle as I said earlier this week. Like, if you have a veteran that you are considering trading, or at least strong considering trading, you don't want to have the guy get hurt while you're talking about it. So that kind of makes sense to kind of have him away from the team, especially while you have Okongwu and Nance both healthy. That is logical in some respects. Also, unlike Bogey, Clint's an expiring contract, so there's not a whole lot of pressure there to do anything with him. There isn't the same level of buzz about a trade, but they're certainly open to moving Clint. I've heard that. It's been reported. They will take calls on Clint. He makes more money than Bogey, but it's easier to move him in some respects. It's an expiring deal. I think Clint's available, to be sure. I think Larry Nance is available, probably a little bit less than Clint because it's just like, value-wise, maybe you extend Nance for a cheap number, all that stuff. But it seems like Bogey and Capela are the guys who are like firmly in the bird's eye right now, but they're not the only ones that the Hawks could trade in the coming days. And if you missed it, I did a Jalen Johnson emergency podcast on Wednesday and referenced like kind of the fallout there. The Hawks are obviously more shifting towards development now this season than trying to win every game. Like they're still trying to win, to be very clear. They're not punting the season. There's no reason to without their pick, but it makes logical sense to look at Risacher. I mean, obviously he was playing anyway, but playing him even more. Look at Mogay, like try to like do some development, some soul searching, and even like in a trade, all deals. And I've said this a lot this week. I'll say it again. All deals the Hawks might consider making should all be focused on next season and beyond for me. You can still make deals now that help you in the short term. The Hawks can still buy if they want to buy and get better in the short term if that helps them, but only if that same move helps you long term, because this season is not the focus anymore. To me, I've argued this before, it's not like revisionist. I don't think it ever was. I think it's just this weird balance between developing and winning because the Hawks don't have their pick this year and Clint wants to win. I get all that. But now it's obviously leaning towards development more so than anything else. So that's where I would be at this point in time. Shift towards the future, but you can still buy. You don't have to sell. There's no like mandate to sell your veterans right now. But it seems to me likely, not definite, likely that Bogey gets moved. And then with Clint, it's much more like up in the air. I'm way less certain about Clint than I am about Bogey at this stage. And then other stuff is like, it's out there. But hey, 6+ days to go, and we'll have much more on the trade front coming up. All right, before I get to the sort of nitty-gritty on the game, because that'll be a little bit shorter than usual. It was a blowout. That's kind of the nature of the beast here with a lot going on. I'll say this before I turn the page to that. The Hawks are currently on their longest losing streak in 5 years. That speaks for itself. Obviously, injuries played a big part in that. The shot making has cratered. I encourage you to listen to the show from Tuesday, where I talked about this as well. It was the same thing today. They just cannot make threes right now. They are sub 30% for the last 6 or 7 games in a row. That's a big problem when you don't have a lot of like finishers at the rim. Sans Jalen, you got to have that. But I will also say, as a bridge to the game itself in a second, this game tonight is not one to like lose your mind over. They're giant underdogs. I know they beat Cleveland twice this year. They were 11.5 point underdogs tonight. That was their second biggest point spread against the Hawks this year, behind only the Boston game, by the way, which they won, which is funny. But, I get it. Frustrating game. The Cavs are kind of a buzzsaw on offense, and that happened in this one. But, broadly speaking, defensively, it just wasn't the same. That's my broad takeaway in this game. Number one, from the actual game itself, is that in the 5 previous games over the previous 10 days, in fact, how about this? The Hawks were number 2 in the NBA in defensive efficiency over the 10 days before the game tonight. So from basically after the MLK game till now, 5-game sample, 10-day, 9-day sample, the Hawks are number 2 in the NBA defense, and they went 0-5. That's hard to do, number one, but they were really, really good defensively. They were just that bad on offense. Tonight, it was not that. Tonight, it was the defense. The defense was really not good. Now, offensively, they weren't great either, but tonight, for the first time since basically the MLK Day game, it was what I would describe as a defense-first loss. The Hawks just could not get stops in this game, and it didn't help that they couldn't make threes. That's obviously a problem when you can't make threes, but it was a buzzsaw. And just as a quick reminder, Cleveland is number 1 in the NBA in offensive rating. This is an awesome offensive team, so it's probably you should take that into consideration. Like, yes, they got drilled today on defense, but also it was by a good team, like a really, really, really good team that has the best record in the league. So I'll stop there for now. We'll have more in a second on sort of the details of this game, including my notes, some stats, and some quick player evaluations. First, though, a word from our partners on the show. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Super Bowl 59 is here. It's coming up in only about a week and a half right now. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than what the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook, whether it's predicting who was actually score the first touchdown, calling the winner of the coin toss, the MVP award, etc. They make it so easy at FanDuel to partake in all of the action. They have all stuff you're looking for across the sports betting space. They have over-unders, point spreads, money lines, player props and game props, live betting, segment parlays, and much more. And with live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff until the final whistle. The live betting feature also allows you to stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is also super easy to navigate at FanDuel. Plus, if you know, you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. That is absolutely icing on the cake. You can download the app right now or head to FanDuel.com to get started. You can bet just $5, and if you win, you get $200 in bonus bets. One more time, bet $5. If you win, $200 in bonus bets, and the place to go is FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel right now, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, some abbreviated notes from this one. The game actually started reasonably well for the Hawks. Risacher hit a couple threes for Atlanta in his return. He's actually missed 7 of the last 8 games before this. He was awesome. He was I would say by far the brightest spot for the Hawks in this game with 30 points. Number 2 all-time for him in his rookie season in the scoring department. But the Hawks gave up a 28-11 run to the Cavs in the first quarter. Cleveland shot 71% for about 9 minutes in this game, and that was it was all uphill from there for Atlanta. Rotationally, nothing hugely surprising. Keaton Wallace stayed in the rotation. His first stint was really, really bad. They were minus 11, like 3.5 minutes without Trae on the court. And for the game, spoiler alert, the bench was a disaster in this game for the Hawks. Sans DeAndre Hunter. Hunter did a good job, scored points, even though he didn't make threes. But, I'm not kidding. Everybody else on the bench was terrible, pretty much, in this one. It was really tough. And by the way, the plus minuses kind of lay that out. The Hawks were competitive in this game. They weren't great. They were competitive with the starters, or at least some of the starters on the court. When it was the bench units, they got drilled, and that was evident on the scoreboard and if you watch this game. They were down 10 by 10 early. There was a stretch where the Hawks were like 4 of 20 from the field over several minutes. I mentioned before already, but Risacher had this big stretch. He had 10 points in a row for the Hawks in the second quarter. He had 20 points in his first 13 minutes. He made his first 9 shots of the game. It was the second highest scoring game of the season, and he had that before halftime. So he was a big story before halftime. They did with it. They got within 6 actually late in the half, and they were down by 8 at the end of the first half. They shot 16 free throws in the second quarter. That's a outlier for the Hawks. That happens very rarely for this team, but it happened at that point in time. They still couldn't make shots. And Risacher, Hunter, and Young combined to score 51 of 63 points in the first half for Atlanta. That's actually kind of crazy. But then the third quarter happened. So a 19-6 run by the Cavs to go up by 20 early in the third quarter. And that was basically, in retrospect, the end of the game. They were a little bit shaky in some key moments, but also the Cavs played great to begin the third quarter. The Hawks did, though, get back within 12. They scored 8 points in a row. They got 5 stops in a row, which was big. They were within 12. They had a shot in the air to get to 9 or 10. But then from that point forward, it was pretty dire. In fact, it was a 20-3 run by the Cavs for about 5 minutes at the end of the third quarter. And if it wasn't over already, it definitely was after that. The Hawks got to 19 in the fourth because they made a bunch of shots that didn't really matter in the fourth quarter. But it was never remotely in doubt after about the 5-minute mark of the third quarter. It was pretty much decided. And we'll leave it there for now as far as the notes are concerned. Overall, I would say the Hawks defense was quite poor in this game. I gave the numbers already about like how much they backslid compared to the previous games. But at the end of the third quarter, when the game was functionally over, the Cavs were shooting 62% from the field. 62% from the field is really, 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 really good. 50 points in the paint. They had 29 assists and 9 turnovers through 3 quarters. The margin got smaller and their efficiency dropped in the fourth, but that was, again, almost full garbage time. First 3 quarters, the Hawks were getting absolutely blitzed, like 1.3 plus points per possession. It was very, very bad. And again, credit to the Cavs, who played great in this one, but still some pretty porous defense from Atlanta. I don't know if it was the matchup or maybe they had tired legs or whatever, but there was some ugliness, I would say. And once again, the bench was just not competitive for the Hawks. On offense, it wasn't actually awful process-wise. They just didn't make shots again. It ended up looking better because they made some shots in the fourth quarter. They actually were 5 of 9 from 3 in the fourth when the game was functionally over. They were 8 of 30 from 3 in the first 3 quarters, which is much more indicative of what they've been recently. I gave this stat on the show on Tuesday, but the Hawks shot 26% in the previous 5 games from 3. That was the worst mark in the league over that sample size. And through 3 quarters tonight, they were 8 of 30, which is essentially right there in that same line at like mid-20s percentage. And by the way, that was with Risacher going 5 of 6. So the rest of the team was 3 of 24 through 3 quarters. Like, what are you going to do? You can't beat a team like Cleveland doing that, basically, especially on that where defense was not great. They did a good job in the margins, actually. Only 11 turnovers. The Hawks, it's actually crazy. The Hawks won the possession battle in this game. So they did a good job. Everything else other than shooting efficiency, which, by the way, is not just because it's not just variance. The Cavs got better shots, have better players, made their shots. So it's not that. But the Hawks did a good job winning in the areas where they kind of had to win. It was that they couldn't make any shots, and Cleveland made all their shots. So very simple. All right, before we get out of here, some quick player notes. I will save playing the audio because I'm already long on this podcast. Quinn was asked about Jalen Johnson. Obviously, he gave like a pretty long, like minute and a half answer by Lauren Williams of the AJC about like just the fallout of not having him. It was diplomatic. Obviously, Quinn and Jalen are tight. They've made a relationship over the last couple of years. Everyone's sad about Jalen. Like if you missed the emergency podcast, I recommend listening to that. It's still relevant at this point in time. But the mood of that was evident. Like no one is at a good place about losing Jalen. Quinn's in the same spot. Obviously, you got to stay upbeat. Quinn was very resolute about that. Like, it's not like the season's over, but it's a tough loss. Everyone knows that. Anyway, to the guys who actually played in this one, not much to add about Barlow and Roddy, who didn't play until garbage time. That's the right choice, by the way, at least with regard to Roddy not playing. Barlow, I might try some, but I get it. Larry Nance, 15 minutes. He was really bad, I thought, actually. Didn't score, 0-5 from the floor, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, but minus 16. Defensively, it was very porous. It's a bad matchup for him, to be fair. Cleveland is very big and also aggressive attacking the rim, and Larry's not a great rim protector at this point at the 5. So bad matchup for him. Didn't play well. Didn't give them much. Honestly, Barlow might have been a little bit better in this game. I think Nance is a better player, to be very clear, but it was a rough one for Larry. Garrison Matthews, kind of a non-factor. He did make 2 threes, but 6 points in 17 minutes. He's just not been very good recently. Hopefully he gets back going a little bit, but not his best effort. Keaton Wallace struggled a lot, 2 points on 5 shots. Did have 2 steals defensively. I think he was okay defensively, but offensively, like his decision-making was not good. I recommend you listen to this as well if you're a Hawks fan. ATL on 29 is a great podcast. It's my friend Kevin Chenard, my friend Glenn Willis, and Tyler Jones, my friend there as well. All have been on this podcast before. They do a show semi-regularly, and they did a show yesterday about, like, and Kevin mentioned this, but Keaton Wallace's decision-making has just been really rough recently. It's a reminder of what I've been saying for a while. Like, he's still a combo guard, not really a point guard kind of player, but offensively, it's like if he's making jump shots, it's good. If it's not, a little shaky. Vit Krejci had a really rough game. I've loved the way Vit's played a lot in the last few weeks. He was brutal today. Fouled out of the game in 21 minutes. Defensively, it was rough. 1 rebound, it was offensive. No assists for Vit in 21 minutes. Like, he just didn't have anything going. I don't know if it was what was going on with him, but it was not a good performance from Vit. So those are the 4 guys on the bench who were not DeAndre Hunter. And if you can't tell my voice, like, it was really rough from those 4 guys off the bench. Hunter had a weird game, 25 points, which is obviously speaks for itself, but he was 1 of 7 from 3 and had 25 points. Not usually his formula, but got to the line 12 times. Actually, he set a new career high with 12 made free throws. not like a headline grabbing thing, but Hunter's not a huge free throw guy. So getting to the line 12 times, making all of them, and he was 5-6 on twos. But also 4 turnovers. Defensively, not very good. Like, it was a weird game. Like, he was fine. He was by far the best bench player for the Hawks, but still not his absolute best, despite the fact that he did make a bunch of shots when nobody else was. To the starters, quickly here. Mo Gay, 16 minutes, 8 points, 3 steals, and a block. I've liked Mo's defensive impact. A lot of it's just like his length and burst and all that stuff. Still raw, but like is impactful on defense. Offensively, he's not helping them right now. Not a huge surprise. Like, I would have projected that for sure. I'm not sure he's a rotation caliber player on offense. That's to be kind right now, but I get why he's playing. He should play. This matchup is a good one for him, and that you're playing a big old team like Cleveland with Mobley at the 4. Like, starting him make total sense. He didn't kill them at all, but kind of an up and down one for Mo. Okongwu, 14.7 rebounds, 4 assists. Thought he was fine. -5 in the game. They were competitive with him on the floor. Kind of a matchup for him as well. Like, Cleveland's got a lot more size than most teams do. But I thought Onyeka was fine. He didn't do anything spectacular, but he did a decent job. Dyson Daniels, 7 points, 5 assists, 7 rebounds, a steal. Was just okay. Like, it wasn't like he had a great defensive impact. Probably a little bit worse than his usual defensive performance in this one. Although I will say he now has a steal in 19 straight games. That's the longest active streak in the NBA and the longest streak by a Hawk since Paul Millsap in 2014. So Dyson is creating havoc regularly, but it was just an okay game for him, I thought. Trey Young didn't shoot it well in this one, 15 points, 10 assists, only 2 turnovers. Like I said, the Hawks did a good job taking care of the ball all night long, but Trey was only 3 of 8 on twos, 2 of 8 from 3. Just didn't have a ton of juice offensively as a scorer. The passing was there, as it almost pretty much always is. I think once we get the potential assist numbers in, it'll be probably through the roof. But it was a below average Trey game. He didn't shoot it well. Most guys didn't, but he definitely did not play a great game here. And then the bright spot, who I say for last, Risacher, 30 points on 16 shooting possessions. Like, he was just electric. Made 9 of his first 10 shots. Obviously not sustainable for Zach, but 5-6 from 3. He was 6 of 8 on twos. Did miss 3 free throws in this game, which is a little bit strange. Only had 1 rebound, but I thought he played well. Obviously, you can't rely on this kind of scoring from him all the time, but he's important. A lot of the focus this week about like who's going to have opportunities has been on Mo Gay, which makes sense. Mo Gay kind of slots into some of Jalen's minutes, but Risacher, hopefully, knock on wood, is healthy and plays a lot and develops and gets on ball reps and just like is a bigger part of the offense. And there will be some rough moments. I think right now he's a below average offensive player. That's pretty safe to say, but he is obviously a really talented player. And if you're looking for bright spots and stuff like focus on from this point forward, the number 1 pick from last year is probably a good place to start for a team that's looking toward the future. So he was awesome today. That was one of the brighter spots. And one more time, the starters were okay in this game. They were actually competitive in this one. It was the bench that got just waxed, and that was a tough spot for the Hawks. All right. I've said a lot of words. I've gone a little bit longer than I wanted to, but there was so much to get to on this podcast that I will have to stop now. But we'll have more to come over the weekend. The Hawks have a 3-game road trip right now that's going and continuing on Saturday in Indiana. PSA, if you made it this far, the Hawks play at 5 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. Don't get got and forget that. It's a 5 o'clock start on Saturday Eastern time in Indiana. And also, of course, the deadline is a week away or less, which I talked about earlier. Stuff can happen there. I'm on emergency podcast watch. I'm on all of that stuff. So the next show will definitely be no later than Saturday night. If there's a move on Friday or a big rumor, I might talk about it on Friday. But just stay tuned to the podcast. Subscribe. That's the best way to find podcasts anywhere you'll find your podcast. Obviously, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Overcast, all those places. Plus, we are on YouTube for every episode as well. So please follow the show on Twitter /X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there as well at BT Rowland. I'm on Blue Sky at BT Rowland. And you can also follow my non-podcast work about the Hawks at patreon.com/BT Rowland. And I might be writing in the near future. So I will plug that if necessary somewhere else. So stay tuned for that as well. Thanks for listening, everybody. I definitely appreciate it. Hopefully you enjoy your Friday into Saturday, and we'll see you at the very latest after the game on Saturday night.